Right, okay. Hi, everyone. So, just testing there to make sure the chat is actually working. Mute that, otherwise that's going to be a right pain in the neck. And another Tuesday talk. This time, I suppose, be very much about 7.3, but it can be on whatever people want to talk about. We've got... just put up the schedule here just to remind people of what is actually coming. Obviously, if you're in North America, it's already come. But yeah, this week, so what have we got? 2 of the 3 zones. All the storyline, that stuff that goes with that, as well as the new world quests and emissaries. Then next week, we get access to the 3rd zone, so it's as well to get the storylines done, because each zone is also behind storyline locked as well as time locked potentially. So you have to do the main storyline in like to get to Argus to access the 1st zone. Then you have to do the main storyline in the 1st zone to get access to the 2nd, and so on. But the 3rd zone is also time gated. Then we've got access to invasion points, so we can start then. We should be able to start getting actually some of the new shards. Zero was certainly not prepared. We should be able to get some of the shards for the new gear, the 910 gear, early on, because it doesn't just drop from invasions, it's also from chests around there as well. And then the final week, of course, the actual stuff that makes a huge difference to everyone, the Netherlight Crucible and the new dungeon. And we're told as long as you've done all the storylines, all the quest lines in the first 2 weeks, that's straight away an instant thing. Certainly I did do the quest lines on the PTR. Obviously there's no context of time gating when you're doing them there, so at the time I didn't know. But if it leads you up to the point where I think it will, then where you sort of assemble this crown, it should just be a short 5-minute scene with involving like Terralion and Valen mostly, and then you're straight to using the Netherlight Crucible just before raid time for most of us that have to go to work. I had to go back to work today after, again, they always do this to me, so I had, you know, like nice 6 weeks off. Did they bring the patch out in that 6 weeks? No, of course not. Let's wait for them to go back. So I went back to work today. Long days as well, 10-hour days, and then again tomorrow. So I'll get back just in time to grab something to eat really quickly before my raid tomorrow. But, you know, so it's just as well that they are time gating stuff, because I'd have no way of being able to do... Let's say it was like 7.2 where we had to do quests on the Broken Shore to be able to unlock our artifacts. I'd have never been able to do that if it was that, if that was coming out tomorrow, because, you know, I'll have like literally 15 minutes to get myself online when I get back. But the other news, by the way, I mean, one thing that people I know have been fairly concerned about, or a little bit concerned about, is obviously what's going to happen when we go to Argus is certain zones, in particular the Broken Shore, will be less relevant. It's not that it won't be relevant anymore, but it'll be less relevant. You certainly won't get people using it as much. And if people aren't doing it as much, that means people aren't going to be handing in their war supplies as much, which means it'll take longer for, in particular, the Mage Tower to come around. In theory, because some people are a bit concerned about that. Because if you still need the Mage Tower for your artifact, hidden artifact skin, then that's a bit of a problem. But Blizzard have just tweeted, they said this a bit ago as well, that they keep an eye on the rate at which these buildings are appearing, and they can adjust that as well. So that shouldn't be a big problem as well. If they notice that there's a lot fewer war supplies being turned in, they'll just reduce the number that are required to turn it in. Hi, Retpal. So we should be okay on that as well. The major thing is, if you've got a load of nether shards now, and just be aware that, I mean, obviously it's too late on North America. If you're on EU, if you were wanting to use them on the vendor that gives the epic stuff, then you won't be able to tomorrow, so use them now. I've actually got loads, but I'm sort of keeping it. I've given up. I mean, the chance of me getting a suitable relic is virtually nil. So I might as well just keep them for when I decide to do my Holy and Protection Mage Tower artifact quests. which at some point I will. Well, certainly the protection one, because I quite like that one. That sort of flail and shield looks quite good. So I might need a big stock of nether shards to actually get me through that. Or I might not need very many at all, I don't know. But I'm certainly going to look that one up before I try doing it myself. And then, of course, I suppose people just need to get up to speed with the changes to their particular classes. Some of them are getting a lot of changes. Ferals, for example. Our Feral Druid is delighted with the changes coming, which I'm assuming means it's a buff. He's already one of our top DPS. He doesn't really need a buff, but, you know, apparently his class does. Mages seem to be getting a buff as well. So our mage seems quite happy about that. But I'm just going to... I seem to have weird things still on here I'm just going to get rid of. And then I suppose we're building up to BlizzCon and what we think is going to be announced for the new expansion. But the Netherlight Crucible, I guess, is everyone happy that they sort of understand how that works? Because that's going to, I think that's going to be an interesting one in a couple of weeks. We'll see. It may not be. But I just think at the moment there's a lot of people don't really know how it works, and when they find out, there's going to be a bit of discussion, I think, on the forums. Or maybe there won't. What do people think? How many people in your guilds? Did we progress? Yes, we killed Maiden. Yeah, we killed Maiden. Let me, hold on a minute. I might be able... I should be able to, hold on. Where's the recording of it? It was one of those, I mean, it was generally sort of okay. It took so many wipes. I couldn't believe how many wipes it's actually taken us to kill that boss. It's so bad. But it's one of those fights where one mistake can wipe the whole thing. And I just need to mute this, basically. Let's put it in somewhere a bit more convenient, and it's nowhere near the beginning. It's right at the end. Hold on. It's actually really finicky to find places. On this, hold on. This might actually be the kill, so let's try and... This may be it. Yeah, it's just one of those fights where one mistake can wipe everyone. It's the only fight I've progressed so far in Tomb of Sargeras where I haven't used Divine Intervention. Because I did do on the first night and then found what good does it do me to auto-build? Because all that was happening is someone was blowing the raid up, everyone's dead, I'm still alive because I'm in my bubble. So then I get died by being smacked in the mouth with a hammer, which means I get a repair bill. Whereas if you die to like spell effects, you usually get away without a repair bill. And so I was actually better off just doing that because bubble doesn't really save you. There's very few mistakes you can make. I actually made one on that night, last night. There's very few mistakes you can make that don't just wipe the whole raid. There is one, what I did last night. What did I do last night? Yeah, one of those swirly things to move away from. I didn't quite move out the way. I tried to pinch it. I was running out of room, so I tried to pinch a bit. I sort of thought I was out of it, and I wasn't. So I got a bomb. I dealt with the bomb, blew myself back, but landed where the tank was aiming the hammer and got smacked by the hammer. So that's pretty much the only way you can die without taking everyone else out with you. But generally speaking, every other way there is of dying just kills everyone. And because people have huge opportunities to do it throughout the fight, you're asking for wipes really. So we lost a lot of world ranks on this boss because we didn't like focus on the mechanics. We're not strong at that. And then onto Avatar, and Avatar, oh, I don't even know. Avatar is a complete nightmare for us. It certainly was last night. It was slim pickings on for that, because there was suddenly like a handful of people all had work last night, just out of the blue, which was really weird. So then for Avatar itself, we just had to go with what we had. And I've just realised I probably... I'm not going to be able to... Never mind. With this new YouTube algorithm, I'm not going to be able to... Well, I'll post it on YouTube, of course, still this. But I'll not even bother monetising it because there'll be no point. The... I'm going to have to cover up weak auras in future. We had loads of melee. We just had loads of melee. And they weren't rogues and warriors. Like, we had 2 rogues, I think, and 1 warrior. It's getting so bad that we're even considering seeing if I can... I've got a rogue out. I mean, it's rubbish, but... Seeing if it's possible to get it up to the point where it's at least able to just soak every touch of Sargeras. But then, I suppose the issue then is... What's the DPS going to be like? Because there's a very tight DPS check in it as well. So I'm really not sure we're going to make up any ground on Avatar of Sargeras either. I just don't think we have the ideal roster. Well, we certainly don't have the ideal roster for it because we don't have 5 rogues. The rogues just seem extremely difficult to get hold of. And for some reason, I opened up my bag. I must have pressed B for bag. But I didn't bother to try and close it down again. I'm actually not sure why. I'm just trying to think what did I press instead of B? What did I mean to press? Can't even think. I was probably trying to get... Oh, I was probably trying to get the nameplate up. I just realised there's no nameplate showing on this one. I had it hidden. Maybe I was trying to get it back up. I don't know why, though. I don't know why I would care about that. There's no ads on this fight. But yes, we're into the tough ones now. And I think projected, because the patch is coming out like now, today in North America, tomorrow in Europe, if we take that 77-day thing, and that's always a bit unsure. You can never be quite sure about that one. Just trying to remind myself. It was mid-November when it might be that the Argus raid comes out. At least patch 7.3.5. But not every raid has come out with the patch, has it? I have an idea Nighthold was slightly away from 7.1.5. Although I can't remember now. I'm making it up. But if it isn't mid-November, then that means another 2.5 months of Tomb of Sargeras. So we've got 2 more bosses to kill. But they are the 2 bosses that take forever. Although the Netherlight Crucible will buff us, and I suppose Blizzard at some point will nerf those. But I don't know. We'll just have to we have to see on that one, I think. How's everyone else getting on in Tomb of Sargeras so far? I thought about something actually quite curious while I was just getting ready for this video. I think I'm going to do a video. It's going to be a silly video. I might do an actual video on it just after when we've finished this stream. But just doing this boss just made me think of something a bit mad. But what do other people think about it now that we've sort of got ourselves a couple of months in? You're 8 out of 9 heroic, but what do you actually think of the raids compared to previous ones in Legion? There we go. She dead. To be honest, the first few bosses, it's numbers. Obviously, if you've got a sensible roster, you've got to bear in mind heroic kill Jaden is harder than the first few bosses on Mythic. Yeah, I mean, Trial of Valor was much shorter, so it's much more comparable, I think, with like Nighthold, maybe Emerald Nightmare, in terms of its size. Trial of Valor was a funny raid. Although the first of 2 likely funny raids, we're likely to get another one like that for after the Argus raid, of course. I mean, for me, it's been a bit a tale of 2 halves. So you spent 2 nights of wiping on Goroth. What are you wiping to on Goroth, though? You can probably guess. All right, if I had 3 guesses, I would probably get it. With Goroth, usually you wipe either because people don't soak the brimstone, the rain, or because range don't watch their position and spawn spikes in the fire, or because when the infernal burning comes in, there's so many spikes up because they haven't been managed that people die when they go boom. Depends what you mean on the pillars. There's 2 ways to the pillars hurt you though on Mythic. One, as I say, is ranged spawn them in fire, which means you then don't have any for infernal burning, or you spawn them in sensible places, but then no one's actually culling them with the star or anything, which means you have too many for when infernal burning comes in. And on Mythic, of course, when the pillars go during infernal burning, they do damage to the raid according to how many too many stayed up. Yeah, well, maybe in that case you need to do the opposite to us and have a few range actually deliberately standing near fire then. So if you've already got pillars up and you know the next wave's going to create too many, maybe deliberately stand by fire so that they do disappear. I don't know. But I mean, really, whoever gets Shattering Star on them should be able to, like, see if there's too many up, and if there are, take more than one. I mean, you need to take one out anyway with that. You know, maybe just take a few out. Yeah, Heroic Tomb of Sargeras I would certainly agree with. Like, when I did Heroic Tomb of Sargeras and that first week came out, I actually thought it was quite nice. But on Mythic, I think less so. Just the flow of it just seems. I mean, the fact that there's so many soaking things obviously means that classes that are not so good. Well, you certainly notice the really good ones for it, and you start to think to yourself, "Why is this? This is a bit of a ridiculous situation." Raid leader not making easy strategy. This strategy is really the same as Heroic, only it is everyone should soak those range. No matter, and if they're all out in range, that means melee should run out to range. You should attempt to get 4 people in each one as far as possible. And then the pillars. I mean, if you haven't got problems with not enough at burning, then that's actually not so bad. It's easy to sort out your problem, I would have thought. You just need some management of them. Maybe what it means is instead of people using their initiative, it needs someone to call whether or not someone with a Shattering Star, say, get someone in range to sort of say, right, you need to break a few of these instead of just one, and then they can go to a clump of them. You love soaking, well, you love this raid then. But I think a lot of people have talked about the fact that it's a bit, it's a bit limited in terms of the punishment for doing things. You know, which I intend to do a video on that at some point. 4 out of 9 Mythic guild can't even re-clear Heroic kill Jaden. This, well, I mean, I don't know in your particular raid situation whether it's worth culling people. It depends on a couple of things, I suppose. The first is, it shows that, as I just said there, Heroic kill Jaden is harder than the first few bosses on Mythic. But in terms of that, I mean, if you've got people that you know are substandard, in theory, you would say, yes, we should replace you with someone who could do these mechanics. Because this is a problem I've had with recruiting, is that you look at some people on WoW Progress, and I don't just look at the numbers, I look at what they're doing on what boss, where the damage is going, stuff like that. And you look at some people, you think, these people can't do the mechanics of this fight. And if they can't do the mechanics of that fight, you will never kill that boss. Maiden, for example, is an absolute classic example, but it's by no means the only example. On Maiden, if you just have if you have someone who cannot deal with these mechanics, you are better off taking 19 people than taking them as 20. Because they will wipe you every time. So if someone just cannot deal with mechanics, or that mechanic, or a particular mechanic, you cannot take them on that particular fight. And there's a few fights like that. Mistress Azine is like, sometimes it's possible to save a bad situation, Mistress Azine. But you can't save everyone. You can't do it all the time. So you do need people to focus on mechanics. Sisters, you can get away with a certain amount, but not too much. Desolate Host, you can't get away with as much. So it doesn't surprise me, for example, that there's some guilds on 4 out of 9 and struggling to get... Like some guilds, like we, for example, got Desolate Host fairly quickly after Sisters. But if you can't deal with the mechanics on Desolate Host, it's a lot less forgiving than it is on Mistress. So you can imagine someone killing Mistress fairly easy because you can afford to have people die, and not on Desolate Host where you can't afford to have people die as much. You certainly can't afford the casualty rates there. But it all depends. Can you replace them? If you identify, excuse me, so many people that are not dealing with those mechanics, are you able to replace them? If you can, then maybe you do think about that. If you can't, then no. You're stuck with them. Because that's ultimately what it's about. Like, as I say, I look at some and just think they cannot do the fights we do on farm, so there's no point in recruiting them. Even though, like in Nighthold, it got quite bad. We were in a situation where we had to cancel a few raids because we didn't have enough people to raid. And you might think, well, in that situation, surely, as a guild, you are desperate enough to just take anyone. But actually you're not, because if they cannot do the fight, they physically cannot do the fight, then it isn't better than no one. You know, what ultimately happens in that situation is you're not going to get someone to transfer when you know they're going to fail. That's not nice. You know, it just means that guild has to collapse. But fortunately, we pulled it through. And now we're in a much stronger position in Tomb of Sargeras. I would still like to be in a stronger position still, but we are at least okay in Tomb of Sargeras. We've managed to recruit where we've had losses. I mean, we had so many losses quite recently, actually, that if that had happened to us in Nighthold, we'd have been finished. Gone. But we've got away with it now. Mythic Raiders switching to Horde Goblins. Oh, yeah, for the Kill Jaden thing. I didn't actually know that, but yeah, now that I think about it, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, should I? Yeah, we're not Horde. We don't have that option. Even if people were up for doing that. And of course, I'd play a Paladin anyway, so I'd be doubly screwed. Even if I were Horde. Can't go Goblin. Unfortunately, no Goblin Paladins, which is a terrible shame. But yeah, so my feeling on Tomb of Sargeras, I really liked the bosses. There's a lot of things I liked about it on Heroic, but Mythic, I think, falls short a bit. Blood Elf, there is only Blood Elf for Horde. That's the only choice they have. Like, Tauren have got no business being Paladins at all. I really don't even know where that comes from. Can't have any gods on more than 7 out of 9. Oh yeah, the next 2 bosses will certainly get a nerf. I'm not. It might not be imminent though, because let's just have a look at this situation. Because not even going to dignify that with a response. Because they might be thinking that maybe the Netherlight Crucible will push a few people forward in a couple of weeks. Let's have a look at the old stats on this. Mythic Fallen Avatar, 114 guilds have killed it. Mythic Kill Jaden, is that 32? So there we go. We just have to kill Fallen Avatar on Thursday, and we're like world rank 100 and something. That'll do. Although in reality, how many have killed Maiden of Vigilance? 408. So there's, where's the biggest gap? Let's have a look. Let's try and have a look. I'm looking at WoW progress. So let's see where the big bottlenecks are. So Mythic Goroth, 4,771. Hold on, let's just do a screenshot. This will be easier. I'll do it for Heroic as well while I'm at it. We'll get rid of... Hold on, we'll get rid of that recording. On Mistress, sorry, are we taking the burdens as a third tank? No, we're not using a third tank. There's 0 use for a third tank. Draenei are not big and have hooves. They have hooves. Only the male ones are big. Why would you play a male Draenei? It's not just that anyway. They are an abomination. I can just about stomach playing a Tauren Druid, and that's only because they're shapeshifted. Where is it? There it is. Right, let's stick that there. So, Mythic Goroth, we've got 4,771. Oh, sorry, go on, let's read some comments. When you say burdens, what do you mean? Burden of pain. Do you mean Mistress? Do you mean Desolate Host? Burden of... I'm very bad at remembering spell names, by the way. Burden of pain, hold on. Oh, that thing, sorry, yeah. On the kill, I had to taunt it when we had a situation where the tanks mucked up. But that's the... No, tanks are fine with it as long as they don't muck up their taunt. They only have to taunt when the other one's got that debuff. So they don't get hit while they've got it. Yeah, I know what you mean now, yeah. I'm very bad at remembering spell names. So, no, there's no need for it. Like, as I say, I have a history in my guild of occasionally taunting when I should not. Only very occasionally. They make too big a deal out of it. But normally, if I do it accidentally, I'll take it off my toolbar and leave it off for a while until I behave myself again. But on that fight, I didn't. Because... hold on. Let's just move that up. There was a situation every now and then where a tank mucked up a taunt, and then we'd get that and then we'd just wipe. So I left it on there in case it was needed. So if ever I saw even a hint of that purple lightning, or if a tank seemed in some doubt as to what was going on, I would just taunt it. Because I knew I could, like, I'd drag it away for a little bit, auto bubble, whatever. It wouldn't kill me straight away. And luckily, because on our first kill, I had to do that. We would have actually wiped really low percentage on our first kill if I hadn't have done that. But it's not a strategy of ours. We don't intend to do it. Shouldn't need to. So yeah, anyway, let's have a look. Where's this bottleneck? So there's a big gap between Demonic Inquisition and Sisters of the Moon. So 3,500 for Demonic Inquisition, 2,300 for Sisters of the Moon. There's it's a bigger gap between those two, isn't it? Demonic Inquisition, so between third and fourth, than there is between that and the Desolate Host. There's not actually that many people stuck on Desolate Host, really. There's 500. Or 502, if you want to be specific. But about 500. Obviously, Mistress has seen a huge bottleneck. Not a big one at Maiden. Because in theory, if you can do Mistress, you should be able to do Maiden quickly. And then, sizable one at Avatar. Really big one at Kil'jaeden. So, probably you would think, if there's going to be nerfs coming, it's probably going to be for Mistress first, before Avatar. Because Avatar... It's probably the guilds, you would argue, that can make progress on those. Same with Kil'jaeden. So they don't need it nerfing just yet. Whereas Mistress, you might have some people... This could be like a guild breaker type boss. Where there might be so many people stuck on this. Like there's 3 times as many people killed Desolate Host as Mistress. So that's a huge bottleneck there. Must be the top. We don't really do top 100 EU. I know, like, North American, we'll talk about top, so whatever, US, which, you know, is fine for recruitment purposes. We don't really, we just talk about world, whatever. And worldwide, we're not. I mean, we only just killed Desolate, Maiden, so we're round about 400. Not even in the top 1%. It's appalling. Appalling. Although it is at least better than during Nighthold. The equivalent point in Nighthold, we were slipping quite badly. But I don't think we would finish... To be honest, if we finished at round about that, where we are now, about 400-ish, by the end of Sargeras, I'd be okay with that. That'd be a big improvement on the last tier. And then we could see if we could improve still on the next one. But it all depends. There's so many things that can massively change your world ranking. You know, just having the right balance of classes in your roster. If you suddenly have a key person leave your guild, say, that is obviously going to set you back. Highest Ixed. If you can have, or if you just have someone go away or whatever. If you have key people unavailable for a little bit. There's so many little things that you can't really, as a guild, plan for that could happen and just send you plummeting in the ranks. Sometimes that's how it is. But I can't see us making any ground on Fallen Avatar. And I can't see us making any ground on Kill Jaden when we get to it. So I think, if I'm honest, I'll consider us lucky if we hold on to a roughly 400 ranking by the end of this tier. Thinking about what our unique strengths are. And then when it comes to heroic, oh, there isn't actually a huge bottleneck in heroic, is there? Really, it's just steady as you'd expect. Do I think we'll be fighting Queen Ashara? Not anytime soon, no. It's one of those, she's one of those villains where she keeps popping up, but we never actually fight her, even when we meet her. I don't know if Blizzard actually want to do that. She might be one of those powers behind the throne type thing for even in the next expansion, where it wouldn't surprise me if they wheeled her in to play a major role. Whether she'd actually be an encounter or not, I'm not sure. And if she were a boss encounter, she could well be like the end one. I don't think we'd fight her early in the expansion. She might feature, a bit like the Lich King featured throughout the Wrath of the Lich King, leveling and dungeons and all the rest of it, but you didn't actually fight him till the end. Was the buff to mastery for Ret enough, in my opinion? It's not far off, actually. It seems to be better now. Whether it's enough depends on your point of view. If you want to go back to when mastery was like the best stat for paladins, that and haste, then it's not going to be that. But it brings it within the mix again. It's now a lot closer than it was. So, you know, the mastery buff, I think, is okay. I don't think the overall change is good enough, because for single target fighting, we're still not going to look strong. And Tomb of Sargeras is all single target. Eventually, they literally all become single target, because, I mean, Goroth, you go Goroth is single target. Demonic Inquisition on Mythic, you have to treat as single target, really. You know, you can pad on the ads, but you're better off leaving that to others as a Ret Paladin and DPSing the bosses. So that's single target, which we're no good at. And you go through the whole raid. Even the ones with ads on, you should still be doing single target if you want to kill the boss. If we assume there'll be a raid with 3 bosses, well, I would say 3 or 4. It's just medium size. Who will they be? I don't know. It could go one of 2 ways for me. The extra raid that has been strongly hinted at. Either they could go with doing what they did in Trial of Valor and finishing off a story that exists on the Broken Isles. That's what I would do. I'd be thinking in those terms. I would just continue a story, do what they did, like, you know, Trial of Valor was finishing off something in Stormheim, which didn't have to be finished off. It wasn't crying out to be finished off, but it was there, and there are similar storylines on the Broken Isles. The alternative is that it could be another raid on Argus. There's nothing to stop them creating another zone on Argus, and that contains a new raid. So for me, it could go either way. Just because, you know, yeah, I mean, it's a whole planet, really. So there's nothing, yeah, there's nothing to stop them expanding Argus. Do I think it'll be a crossover raid to the next expansion? I don't really know. I think there have been very few crossover raids. If I think about it, there wasn't, Vanilla was just a hodgepodge anyway. TBC, you had Sunwell Plateau. That was a good foot in both camps because it was Legion based by its nature. So you had that link with Burning Crusade. But it was also involving the Blue Dragon flight. So that carried on. That storyline with Malygos going mad carried on into Wrath. That's the only real one I can think of that has been a genuine crossover. At a stretch, you could argue Siege of Orgrimmar, because Garrosh at the end of it goes, after he's defeated, goes back in time, alternate universe, rubbish to wad. But you didn't feel that it was a crossover one when you did Siege of Orgrimmar. I think the lead up to the next expansion will come, like it does for most expansions, from the pre-expansion patch. So for Legion, for example, they had the invasions. You know, for Wrath, they had the zombie invasion thing. For TBC, they had another Legion invasion thing event. Cataclysm, I wasn't playing at the time, but I'm told there was something related to gnomes involving that for Cataclysm. Mop, I don't think did we get anything for Mop? We didn't really get anything for Mop, did we? And WoD, we got an event as well where we were destroying like Iron Horde stuff in the Blasted Lands. So I think that's what the lead up will be. It will be the pre-expansion patch. I think the raid that we get will be related to Legion somehow. And I don't, you know, and it's either going to be in the Broken Isles, as in, or it already exists, they haven't put in a raid portal yet, or it's going to be an expansion of Argus. If I was to have to put money on it. But what would be of more interest to me is how difficult it will be, because the Trial of Valor was, I mean, especially coming after Emerald Nightmare, was a huge step up. Like, even the first boss was a significant ramp up from the bosses of Emerald Nightmare. And Guam, okay, wasn't that difficult, but, you know, on Mythic mode, it could be tricky enough. And then Helya was just brutal. Helya was frightening before it was nerfed. It was hellish. And I don't know whether they want to do the same thing with the new one or they want to do something completely different. Because if I was thinking about this, if I'm thinking to myself, so when's this raid going to come out? So what, hang on, what we're thinking. Let's say that Antorus comes out mid-November. And let's say Blizzard say their tier should last 4 to 5 months. So let's say 4.5 months. So that would mean beginning of April, round about Easter time maybe. Beginning of April-ish is when we'll be ready for that new raid. At that point, we would be into full swing alpha beta testing of the next expansion. Now, they want people to have the time to do that testing properly. So they and traditionally a significant proportion, not all, but a significant proportion are raiders, like cutting edge raiders. So they don't really at that time want to be giving people a really tough new raid. I think they'll make it fairly straightforward, relatively straightforward. I think it'll be one where the world first will be in a week, and even guilds like just bog standard cutting edge guilds like my guild would probably find it does not take up a horrendous amount of time. I think it'll be there largely for content for more casual players, is my instinct. Or it's not even my instinct, actually, that's a lie, because I have no idea. That's what I would do, I think, is a better way of saying it. Should we get rid of this now? But it's a tricky one, because from my point of view, if Antorus was the last raid, I wouldn't be that bothered, as long as I'm in the alpha or beta, whatever they want to call it. I wouldn't be that bothered because I'd be occupied doing that. Raiders in general, I don't think would mind, because we'd be doing whatever raiders do at that time, which is usually just chill and wait for the next expansion. But they don't want accusations of a content drought. So they want to make it challenging enough for people who just want to carry on playing the game, but not too challenging that holds everyone back who might otherwise be testing. But yeah, I don't know what other people think. That's sort of what I would expect. But that's yeah, as I say, that's just me in terms of what I would do, rather than I think what I don't know what's in Blizzard's mind with it, because they haven't even said anything yet. Other than there's no large expansion, there's no tiny expansion. Sorry, raid. So you just sort of process of elimination, say, well, there is another raid coming. Oh, I want to see what Blizzard have got to say to this one. Hilarious. Someone's just asked, I say just asked, not actually just asked, but asked on the North American forums. Stop. This is the opposite to what I was saying, because obviously, I mean, one key thing that's come with Legion that hasn't really existed in a major way in previous expansions, maybe piecemeal, but not in a major way, is that Legion as an expansion has taken away the notion that questing is just for leveling. That's obviously something they want to foster. So we've had Suramar as a zone that was only there for end game. So you had to be level capped to even do it, and it's full of quests. Then we've also got the Broken Shore. Okay, there's not loads of quests there, but there's a few. And then we're going to have 3 new zones on Argus. Each of those zones sure is not as big or detailed as the Broken Isles ones, but nonetheless it's 3 new zones with quests in each one. So there's plenty of quests that are only for level cap players. Someone on the North American forums has gone in a post, "Stop max level quest" as the title. Then in their comments, "They are not fun." Blizzard's response, "No." Quite funny. Oh, I like that one. But yeah, I don't think has there been any? I ought to check the hot fixes just in case there's anything I hadn't noticed, but I don't think there is. Something affecting hunters on Fallen Avatar, a bug, but I don't think there's been anything. Nightfall and requirements removed from several Suramar quests, so you don't need as much rep now. It's just bug fixes, so there's no new class changes, 11th hour class changes. So I feel slightly justified in having actually done that rec guide, because I was a bit worried if I did it before the patch actually came out, they might change something all of a sudden, but they obviously haven't done that, so that's okay as well. Well, yeah, max level of story is usually better than leveling quest. I mean, they're supposed to be stories in the leveling ones as well. You know, they're all supposed to lead something. I think sometimes, especially well, if you've leveled up as a newish player, you might not get that impression. I mean, this is why I think the leveling experience is so bad, because you don't get time to do any stories when you're leveling now from, say, 1 to 60 or even 1 to whatever. Because you start off on 1, and by the time you've got to the end of it, it's not even green, it's grey, the quests. Which is why I'd personally just rather they got rid of levels in general. I just don't like the idea of levels. If they got rid of levels and just had quest lines, and if the rewards for quest lines were upgrades to your character, like talents or something like that, that would probably work better. And then it wouldn't matter how long it took you to get through them. Yeah, well, it is a buff. How much of a buff, as I say, depends on different people. It depends on what gear you've got as to how much you gain, but everyone should gain a bit. However, as I always say, just to throw down on things, 'cause I like to be contrary, a buff can be as good as a nerf if everyone else is buffed more. Now, in this case, they haven't been, so we should still see a slight gain. But yeah, but it's still not going to be good enough on the single target is the issue. Really, the only way to do good damage as a Retribution Paladin is to pad into my Sargeras, which is a little bit disappointing. Oh, just read a funny comment on one of my YouTube videos. Oh no, the comment seems to have been deleted. I get that quite a lot, actually. You get someone post something. I think sometimes what it is they post it and then I say something after it and they go, oh yeah. But yeah, I mean, I suppose as well because a few classes are getting buffed, and this is probably why there haven't been any nerfs like immediately, even though you could look at the situation and say, okay, should we need them? Because Blizzard will probably be thinking to themselves, the raid DPS will go up a little bit this week, maybe that will just push a few people forward. Then in 2 weeks, another like Crucible, again, people their DPS will just go up a little bit. Again, might push them forward. So they might just wait a few weeks to see. Any new speculation about new class, race or class for next expansion? There's plenty of speculation. There's always speculation. And the closer we get to an announcement about the expansion, the more that speculation will increase. Especially I mean, there's always speculation on something. So when there's no longer speculation on the current expansion, and there probably isn't, because without me going into spoilers in this video, we do know how, even though, and yes, there is another raid to come after it, but in terms of the main storyline of Legion, we know how it ends, if we want to know how it ends at any rate, because that's dealt with in the next patch. I have done my +10. I did it yesterday. I did a +15. But in terms of specifically race stroke class for next expansion, the speculation, no, it's not International Talk Like a Pirate Day. And it hurts my throat. My throat's already done in from 10 hours of talking today. The speculation is about sub-races, because, I mean, there's not going to be a new class, obviously, we've only just had a new class. Blizzard do tend to alternate, though. Hang on, I got this wrong before, didn't I? What was there now? So, TBC, we got new races. You could sort of say we got new classes, because Paladins and Shamans were faction-specific at the time and then became not. So you could argue you sort of got both. Wrath, you got new classes. Cataclysm, you got new races. Mop, you got both again. Wad, you got nothing. Then Legion, we've got new classes again. So maybe in the expansion after, they might want to do another class. It had better be a ranged class. Although, quite frankly, I just think there's too many classes full stop now. There's too many. There's also too many specs. I think there's... When you get to a situation like this, like World of Warcraft demonstrates something, I think. Because it's an MMO that's first of all gone on for quite a long time. And it's been well resourced throughout that time. You know, it's not running on fumes like some MMOs. This one is still going strong and therefore still has a lot of money and a large development team to keep pushing changes through. And it sort of shows you, I think, that with an MMO, after a certain amount of time, certain core aspects of the game are not conducive to long periods of time. I think levels is definitely one, but also new classes is another. Not so much new races. You could keep coming up with new races till the cows come in. That doesn't affect anything. Unless, of course, well, they ought to deal with racials. I do think they ought to deal with racials. And to stop them being so divisive, really. Maybe it would have been better if for every racial you had on, let's say, an alliance character, you had basically the same thing on a horde race. Called something different, but that was essentially the same thing. That might have been better in retrospect. But yeah, sub-races could be a good way to go. Because then you can have more choice. More. I mean, I think what people want is more customization. We have so little customization. I can't actually think of an MMO that has as poor customization of the character at character creation. A talent tree for races. I wasn't thinking... Well, maybe sort of like it. Like Lord of the Rings Online, for example, has a different system. It has... For that one, you have like... I might get the numbers slightly wrong here, but I don't think... You have like 9 racials, which you have to earn. So it's like talents. You don't just get given them. You have to earn them. But you choose 4 of them to be active. Now, something like that might be okay, where there's several racials, and you choose which ones are active like talents. That might work. Well, Naga wouldn't be suitable as a new race, because, like, as I say, in World of Warcraft, the game is, I think, accidentally racist, because all the races just align themselves with certain powers. So, for example, you can't have trolls in the Alliance, because apparently that wouldn't be the done thing. So the same with Naga. The Naga obey Lady Vash, not Lady Vash, behave. Queen Ashara, and Queen Ashara is, you know, in league with the old gods. So you couldn't have Naga like player characters, even though it shouldn't be an issue. It just has been for so long that it's just a thing. Disagree. Prefer to have different racials in an MMORPG. The problem, though, is gameplay issue. You create a situation where you imbalance factions, because even if there's just a perception that one is better than the other, or even if on the face of it they look balanced, but in actual fact there's a racial, for say Horde or Alliance, it doesn't matter which one, for what ends up being the strongest class, then you create an imbalance. Well, the thing is, they won't get rid of factions. Factions work for PvP, of course. They make sense in PvP. Factions don't make a lick of sense in PvE. They make the game less playable. We have friendly Naga now, don't we? I don't actually know that we do, but even if we do, I'm not saying we don't, the thing is, like, they wouldn't be on either the Horde or the Alliance. As I say, I come back to the different races. So, you know, they're all very tribal, but as NPCs, they're sort of okay with it. Like, we're allowed to have, for example, humans and Tauren and orcs mixing together in, like, the Earthen Ring, or what's the druid one? Whatever the druid thing's called. You know, in like those sort of groups. But they never allow, you never see a Tauren wandering around Stormwind, for example. It's in Blizzard's interest to keep racials significant. Why is it? I don't see how it makes them any money. It loses them money. Because the problem with racials being as they are, if you're an Alliance player and you can't find a guild at the moment because the guilds are all Horde and you can't afford to pay whatever it is now, it's a lot of money now to transfer faction. Even if you don't have to transfer realm, which is actually pretty likely. The cost to transfer realm is actually not hideous. It's more than it should be, I think, but it's not hideous. The cost to transfer faction is what piles on the cost. So you get someone who, so they can't find a guild because, you know, there's not the place available. They're Alliance. So what do? They quit the game. If raiding is what they want to do and they can't do it, they quit they're not going to spend what must it come to now? It's the equivalent of about 6 months subscription to transfer one character faction, change one character and transfer it realm. Some people go, I'm not going to do that, especially if they've got a lot of characters. So it doesn't make them money, it loses them money. You know, the realms thing I think makes the money. I think they make money from realm transfers. Obviously they make some money from faction ones, but I see so many people leave the game because they can't find a guild. And it's not that they can't find a guild. Anyone can find a guild if they could apply to any guild, you know, that would be suitable for them, I'm saying, that is. What they actually mean is they can't find a guild without having to shell out about 200 quid to transfer their characters. And you can't really blame them for that. Especially if, and I've had a few people do this just for transferring realms. There's not a lot of people. There are some people. There's not a lot of people at all who will pay for the smallest advantage. There's a tiny number of people that will do that. If there were a lot of people willing to pay for that small advantage, you can bet your arse that advantage wouldn't exist. Blizzard would get rid of factions in an instant. Because if there were a lot of people doing that, that would actually mean that loads of people would transfer to whichever was giving them that advantage. The game would become unbalanced to the point where it can't actually sustain itself because everyone is playing the strong classes and specs and everyone is playing the strong race. You would have zero variety and the game would implode. So Blizzard would stop that before it ever happened. So it's a small number of people who will pay to do that. But what does happen is you get the imbalance in Horde because people see that Horde has a lot more guilds. So there'll be people who will make Horde characters because of that. And on those high population realms. Imagine Blizzard make instead of Naga some kind of siren race. What, like nymphs? Water nymphs? They could. They could make a race that has been hitherto not been a part of Warcraft. Be interesting to note if people would get excited about it or not. There's a lot of people who weren't very happy about Pandaren. And they had had a small amount of exposure in Warcraft 3. before they became a playable race? Would people really take... The strongest race spec combo changes, of course, doesn't really. In this expansion, if you have played a warlock, a hunter as a DPS, or a rogue, you have been able to get in guilds way above your talents all through the expansion. So anyone who would just go for the advantage as their be-all and end-all, everyone, all DPS would be rogue, warlock or hunter. Mages have been a bit up and down. But that's what every DPS would be. Whereas it's nothing like that. I can't find a rogue for love nor money. Can't find one. They are the strongest class by a mile for raiding. And they always have been. This is not a recent thing. They always have been ever since vanilla. If you are a rogue, you can be a fairly limited skill. And you will get into a much higher guild than you could possibly get into on any other class. What kind of range class would they come up with? Like, for me, a dark ranger type thing. Because for me, like the Sylvanas type thing is not, in undead form, is not so much a hunter. You would probably refer to her as a hunter when she was in elf form. That's the only thing I can think of. But you obviously couldn't call it a Dark Ranger. And then the other problem is, even if they made the mechanics really unique, I would struggle to see how they can bring out now, after all this time, another ranged bow-wielding class without it just being considered a subspecies of Hunter. So it is a difficult one. Necromancer, I think we talked about this in a previous Tuesday talk. Necromancer would be possible. The downside to Necromancer is because that existed in Warcraft. You know, that was a class in Warcraft. Warcraft 1 and 2. I can't remember 3. Probably 3. Well, I don't know. Bards haven't really been in Warcraft. They'd probably have to take it from Warcraft, the RTSs. So you could have Necromancers. The downside to Necromancers, of course, is, if you think about the mechanics, you have to make sure that they wouldn't be... They might end up... Just like Demon Hunters nicked a load of stuff from Demonology Warlocks, it might well be that the Necromancer class has to nick a little bit from Warlocks again, and maybe Death Knights to work. But that's the main one that I can think of. How can you have a DK Hunter? There's a DK Hunter in Class Hall. What, am I missing something? I don't understand that. Yes, whatever it comes. This is where you've got the problem. If you come up with a Necromancer, there is no way you can have it as a male user. When they did the Demon Hunter, from what I could tell from Blizzard, without them specifically stating this, because when they talked about the philosophy of designing the Demon Hunter, they talked a lot about whether it should be leather and blah, 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 blah. What I took from that was them saying they really wanted to make it a male user if they could. But obviously it don't make any sense to do that. An NPC in Hunter Class Hall. I'm not sure, Fraser, what you... DK as in Death Knight, a Death Knight Hunter in Class Hall. But yeah, it means an undead. Okay. Oh, that's fine. I've got nothing against the undead. Unfortunately, there's gnome hunters, which I'm much more concerned about. But so yeah, in terms of a male ranged class, it's not an easy thing to think of, is it? But they cannot have... I mean, I don't think there should be any more classes full stop. I think there's already too many. You know, when the hardest mode of raiding is 20 man. And you think of... I mean, let's take... The tanks have the worst of it, really. Because you've got 6 tank class combinations. And they're all quite distinct as well. And you only have 2 in a raid. So... Or you have 2 in your roster even, which is even worse. So straight away, unless those tanks, and some serious tanks, do play multiple classes. But unless they do that, that means you've only got access to 1/3 of the tank specs in your raid. Apart from possible off-tank ones. Healers generally are okay, because there's 5 healing classes. And there's room for 5 healers in a roster easy. Sometimes even 6. So you're okay with healers. But then DPS. So let's say in a typical raid, you want about 14 DPS. You've got 12 classes that can all play DPS straight away. Then you've got shamans and druids that have a ranged and a melee one. I know hunters do too, but survival is still low enough in numbers that I couldn't just forget about them. So that makes 14 straight away. So you've got 14 class DPS combinations. And obviously with some of those, you actually want a couple of them. So you've got too many class combinations already for DPS to fit into a raid. So whenever you, doesn't matter how you pick your raid, you are always going to be missing something. And what that means is if a particular class is useful on a fight and you have the option of taking multiple of them, then that means some poor bugger who might be a perfectly good player but plays a class that brings nothing on that fight is sat. Give each class a strong aura. You still won't get equal class representation though, because the problem is that there's not enough room in the raid for them. You have to do without someone. And some will always be better than others. Like, I mean, the way you're coming back to rogues, comparing rogues and paladins, for example, just from a defensive point of view, because defensives can be good utility. So if I compare my bubble, which has a 5-minute cooldown, makes me immune to things, with Cloak of Shadows, which has a 1.5-minute cooldown, and makes you immune to magic effects. So on the face of it, if you look at what's in the can, the ingredients, you think, well, bubble's better because it makes you immune to everything. Cloak of Shadows is only to magic, so maybe it makes sense that bubble has a longer cooldown. Although quite why it should be more than 3 times the length is another matter. But when it comes to it on an actual raid, the vast majority of things that you want to be immune to are magic damage. So that means Cloak of Shadows is actually as good as bubble, but it has a much shorter cooldown. But then you come on to Tomb of Sargeras. Tomb of Sargeras has some specific mechanics where bubble doesn't soak it, but Cloak of Shadows does. So actually, in real terms, Cloak of Shadows is better. Well, the Feint, I mean, that's just the icing on top with Feint and stuff like that. That's obviously the reason why you want to take loads on Avatar, because with Feint, they can soak every single touch of Sargeras. So what you do is if Cloak's available, they use Cloak, and if it's not available, they use Feint. It will nearly kill them, but nearly isn't actually kill them. And obviously the healers will understand that whenever a touch of Sargeras is going to come in, the rogues are going to take a massive amount of damage, so they will be right on to healing them back up again when it's finished. There's no immediate source of damage when the touch of Sargeras has gone off, so there's no need for... It's not like it needs to be a quick reaction thing either. But it's just I'm just comparing like 2 abilities there. That's, you know, you can compare other abilities. There will always be abilities where you can look at it in isolation and think they're actually as good as each other, or even that A is better than B. But in the realities of a raiding situation, it's completely different. And I think this is where they go wrong, because I am now convinced, Because at first I wasn't, because I couldn't believe such a thing would exist. But I am now convinced that class and encounter design, raid encounter design, are totally independent of one another. I don't think there's any coordination. And I used to not believe it because that would be a really silly thing to do. But now I'm sort of more convinced, especially after that interview where Ian was basically suggesting that even the encounter design team don't coordinate amongst themselves. So if they don't even coordinate amongst themselves, are we really to believe that they coordinate with an entirely different team? I don't think so. Why is soak mechanics so prevalent? So what Ian Hazakostas was saying is the encounter design team, so what they did is they had a big meeting where they fleshed out the basics of the bosses. Then each team, each mini team went away to design each boss. So you had a team for Goroth, a team for Demonic Inquisition and so on. And they all went away. And while they were developing the boss, what happens is they come to problems. The problem might be, oh, people are just going to be DPS in here for about a minute with nothing to do. We need to add some mechanics in. Or it might be, oh, this mechanic that we had planned is not working as intended. We need to change it for a different mechanic and blah, 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 blah. So what happened is, independently and organically, as they would say, several of them came upon soak mechanics that would solve their problem. But because there was no one going around these teams and checking on a day-to-day basis what they were doing, no one realised that everyone was putting soak... Well, not everyone. Whoever designed Demonic Inquisition didn't think of that. But everyone else was putting soak mechanics in, and until it was too late. So, yeah. But as I say, the fact that you haven't got someone coordinating within a team means that there's no way I can believe that they're coordinating between teams either. Between, you know... And they should. And I'm not talking about adding, as I say, loads of layers of management. I've said this before. They just need someone, doesn't even have to be a manager, but just someone whose job it is to have an overview of what's going on. And they can report to a manager if they think there's something a bit funny. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't know what they think. I'm not sure it's that as such, because I don't think Blizzard have that attitude. You know, when, like, if you think about it, when a new expansion comes out, one thing... For my money, all I ask of an expansion is new content. You just want new content and a different theme. That's it. If there's anything that needs dealing with, fine, improve it. But you don't need anything else if it's working. But they do anyway. They change things. They change them for the sake of it. So one thing you can be sure of with every new expansion is the classes will change. Sometimes they change a lot, like in Legion. Sometimes they're just tweaked, as I expect to happen in the next expansion. But there will be changes. And they'll advertise them. They'll advertise it as class changes are coming. They'll talk about, you know, all the new features that are coming. Whereas I don't think they have because they have an attitude when an expansion's coming up, we need to completely change a load of stuff. I mean, it might have been that in WoD, some classes and specs might have been playing all right, and yet they got changed anyway, just to accommodate this massive class revamp that Blizzard put in, and especially for the artifact weapon abilities. You know, whereas if they changed a few classes in an expansion, then I would believe they were just tackling the ones that they thought needed work. But when they do it wholesale to everything. A demo tank spec. Yeah, I think you could have a demo tank spec. So the demon actually doing the tanking and the warlock controlling it and using spells. Because it could use its spells. Instead of doing a load of DPS, it does some DPS, but it empowers the demon. You know, use different spells to empower the demon. So you'd have your active mitigation there. I can see it being a fairly fiddly tank to use. I can see its uses. I can see it being possible to do it. Whether it would be sensible to do it is another matter, but I can see it being possible. Well, of course, combat was still called... oh, it was called combat. What am I talking about? It's Outlaw now, that's it, isn't it? I knew it changed the name. I've forgotten which way around, yeah. So used to it now. Yeah, I'm not keen on Outlaw, I have to say. I started leveling up as Outlaw. I tried it a bit even in the pre-expansion patch and also a little bit in the Legion Alpha. To try and like it, but I just never could. Oh, God. I'm not sure I can click that. Hold on. Oh, hold on. You've linked it to me. Hold on. Yeah, but it's still a hunter. It don't even have... Does he even have blue eyes? He doesn't even have blue eyes. He's not a Death Knight. He's just got a fancy name. Death Knights have blue eyes. Yeah, well, obviously, like, I mean, that's another problem with changing a spec a lot as well, because subjectivity comes into it. Some people might like a particular spec and some people might not. Then what happens is you have someone who doesn't. Look, I'm going to write. Hold on. Let me click on that link again. You get someone who does... sorry, I'm a man. I can't multitask. Sort this out now. Right, where are we? Alright, so there we go. Look, green eyes. Green. They're not glowing blue. Green. And not even glowing. Right, that's that one sorted. No, it's not a Death Knight. He may not even hunt death. Does he say he hunts death? I don't know. I've not well, if I've noticed him about the place, I've paid no attention to him. I don't spend that much time in the Hunter's Lodge, True Shot Lodge. You might. Well, you say he is a Death Hunter. Are there more than one? Is there another one called Death Hunter? Because if there isn't, it's just a name he's given him to himself. He just calls himself it. Doesn't mean he is one. There's another one. Where's there another one? Where's the other one? There's a few. Well, if you want to hunt death, I would have thought it's fairly simple, especially in True Shot Lodge. You just take yourself outside and jump off that cliff. You'll find death fairly quickly that way. I will read it later. Right, okay. I've forgotten. I was actually saying something else, wasn't I? I've forgotten. Oh, yeah. So, yeah. So I feel sorry, for example, for people who play a spec, do really well with it in an expansion. And then it all... well, not a spec, actually. A class, I should say. A class role combination, should we say. I don't have much sympathy for people who play, say, Assassination Rogue and then won't play a different spec, even if it's better, like Subtlety at the moment. You know, if you're going to play a rogue and you want to... If you want to play it seriously, if you want to play it casually, do what you want. If you're going to play it seriously, then, you know, it's beholden upon you to learn all of them and play which is best. But, yeah, playing at least a class role combination. And then it all changes next expansion, and all of a sudden you don't like playing it anymore. So I do feel sorry for people who are forced into that situation. Because then it's like, for me, for example, I don't think I would want to main anything other than a Retribution Paladin now. Or at least not a Paladin. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed, not that I'd be thinking about it, to a Holy Paladin. I have nothing against playing a healer these days. Ironically, the reasons that I stopped healing back in TBC would not be relevant now. They'd be very different. So I wouldn't be opposed to it now. But at the same time, it's so long since I've healed that I can't be bothered. The rogue specs are wildly different. But this is this is why I talk about whether you're a serious player or not. If you're a serious player, you've just got to bite the bullet. I mean, I get no say in the matter playing a Retribution Paladin. You know, if they change my spec beyond all recognition, which they have done a couple of times, I either like it or lump it. I don't have the choice of playing a different spec. What is happening with Vol'jin at the moment? Nothing. He's dead. The last thing... I know it was ambiguous because Vol'jin had this thing about the... Basically, Vol'jin said something that didn't make any sense about the spirits and what they'd said about Sylvanas having to lead. And so you've got an unfinished story there. And then Blizzard said that maybe his story wasn't finished. But the thing is, when Blizzard were asked a few months later, when's Vol'jin coming back, the very terse response they got from Ian Hazakostas, or whoever it was that was doing it at the time, was, he's dead. Now, that doesn't mean to say that the story wouldn't be brought back again at some point, but they're certainly not expecting, or they don't sound like they're expecting, to finish off that story in Legion. It's just one of those unfinished stories. Maybe they'll get around to it one day, maybe they won't. I agree, you could certainly swap the mechanics between a Retribution Paladin and, I don't think, Subtlety Rogue. But let's say an Outlaw and maybe an Assassination Rogue, certainly, and not notice the difference. I've thought that myself, in fact. I don't think for Subtlety, though. Subtlety is a different beast. I'm not quite sure you could make all the Subtlety abilities yellow and call them holy something, and it would look like a Retribution Paladin. But Assassination and Combat, you could certainly change the abilities to do largely the same thing, but call it holy something, and change the animations, and you get away with it, yeah. Although, I don't quite know what the holy version of Roll the Bones would be. We roll the bones every tier anyway. You know, do we get a good proc or not? So it's unlike rogues, it's not just a case of building up a bit more combo points and trying again if it's rubbish. It's right, let's try again next tier. That's a funny thing though. They don't seem to have... I've noticing this. And it came to my mind when I was watching an interview with Tolkien a bit ago. Because like when you play different role-playing games, you notice something. There's something very different about WoW in terms of religion. It doesn't really... Like in other like Dungeons and Dragons and Elder Scrolls and like Warhammer and stuff like that you play, they all have a polytheist system where they all worship different deities. You don't have that in World of Warcraft. Even though they've got temples and cathedrals, the only reference you ever get to anything even remotely religious is praying to the light. But that's not really a religious thing as such. It's... you know, the light is not considered to be God. I suppose it's because they know that their creators are effectively what they are, I suppose. I don't know. But they don't have it. It doesn't have a recognisable system of religion in World of Warcraft. And the reason it sort of came to mind is because there was an interview with Tolkien where the same thing was put to him about Lord of the Rings. Or just the world of Middle-earth and stuff like that. There isn't one in that either. But the lower, what I'm trying to say is the lower are not gods. They're beings, and they know they're beings. They're beings that they consider themselves subservient to. They worship them, but they don't pray to them as such. Like, they worship them as a servant might grovel at the feet of their master. But like, for example, what's the cathedral in Stormwind for? Because they know who shaped Azeroth. They know it's the Titans. They know their names. So it's like they're actual beings. So there's no sort of faith as such. It's just the light. Exactly. It's just the light. And they don't think that the light is God. They just know it's a power that they can tap into. It's like the Force in Star Wars. Yeah, but they don't think it's coming from a god as such. They just know it's a power in the universe that they're tapping into. But anyway, it's just a little aside. I just thought it's really curious when it's very in your face in other fantasy genres. Yes, we're like Jedi. Only we're more like Jedi in episodes 4, 5 and 6 there, where they're not taken seriously. As opposed to at the start of episode 1, which is the only good bit of episode 1, where that guy from the Trade Federation is crapping himself because 2 Jedi are after him. But anyway. There's a ridiculous number of Star Wars films coming out. I don't think I'm going to bother with them all. There's going to be a film for everyone, isn't there? They're going to have a film for early Han Solo, a film for early Obi-Wan Kenobi. There'll be another film for Yoda. It's all just going to get ridiculous. Probably one for Chewbacca where he was a little furball. Before very long. But speaking of which, it's still gone quiet. I still haven't heard definite confirmation that the Warcraft 2 is going to be a thing. No, we don't need Jar Jar Binks, thank you. I know they're doing Obi-Wan. They're doing several. Yes, they're doing an Obi-Wan movie. As if we needed one. But the Warcraft 2 is more of more interest to me if they make that. I'm not quite sure that... I mean, the story diverged quite a lot in the Warcraft 1 film. So I'm not quite sure what their focus would be. Obviously, they'd have to have Thrall. Because they made such a big thing of him. I do... Every time I see any sort of retweet about a possible remaking of it, from Duncan Jones, I always have to sort of say to him, you'd better put Tyrallion in it. Because I think there was a number of characters not included because it was already very character heavy. I think that was one criticism, although there's nothing they could really do about it. In the first Warcraft film, there were a lot of characters in there. Anakin like Arthur, yes he is, very much. I don't think there's anything really original about... Hi, Snuggy Lips. I don't think there's anything super original about the Warcraft, any of the Warcraft stories. Any of the Warcraft stories you can... major storylines, you can point to another fantasy film or book. You didn't like the first film? I quite liked it. I wish they'd have kept some of the deleted scenes I thought were very good though, and I wish they'd have kept those in. It's a bit like Suicide Squad. I quite liked Suicide Squad, but it was a lot better in the extended version than it was the movie, the cinema version. The Murlocs, yes, I like a Murloc. The only issue I had with it, I'll tell you the only issue I had with the Murloc scene. The king is coming from Stormwind to Goldshire. So he's passing sort of southwestish, coming that way. The Murlocs are in the lake area behind the inn. So there shouldn't have been one visible on the road, on that bit of road, from the direction they were coming. That was my only issue with it. They put the lake in the wrong place. But I forgive them because they did at least put a Murloc in. But yeah, I suppose the storyline you would go for is they'd have to, obviously they've diverted so much from the original one. The Murloc is the bridge by the lumber area. There is no lumber area in between them. You go from Stormwind to Goldshire. There's no Murloc area. The nearest Murloc area is there's behind the Goldshire Inn, or there's carrying on in that direction towards the well, not that direction, but carrying on round and past and heading towards the lumber camp, which is way over towards Redridge. Looking at the for me, the reason why, because it did pretty well in Europe, it did all right in Europe. Obviously, it did really well in Asia, and didn't do very well in North America. And I don't know whether anyone can really properly pin it down. The nearest I can come to, because I saw some reviews from certain people that review films, like popular North American film reviewers. The main thing I got from it was that the reason people didn't like it was nothing to do with the film. It was entirely to do with the fact it was seen as a Tolkien ripoff, just because it's got orcs in it, which is sort of true. Like, you know, we're used to it as fantasy gamers because you have orcs in Dungeons and Dragons, you have orcs in Warhammer, you have orcs in Warcraft, you have orcs in Elder Scrolls, you have orcs in fantasy role-playing games, because ultimately fantasy role-playing games take their inspiration initially off Tolkien stuff. But because of that, it was just seen as that. Now, if I were to go back in time, let's say, obviously I've got no influence, but let's say I did, and I saw this now, went back in time, I would change it to having no orcs in it at all to begin with. So I would do a storyline of either the War of the Ancients, missing out Broxigar, or what I think would be better would be the Lich King story, so Arthas's story, because then the orcs were sort of intertwined with it, but they weren't a direct part of that story arc. So you could do that. I thought it was a very solid movie. I thought it was a very good film. And I watched reviews, for example, reviews that I saw, European, well, let's face it, British reviews, because I can't speak any other European language, were actually quite positive about it. The only really bad reviews I ever read were North American ones. And it seemed to be, even though they ranted about all sorts of stuff, the thing that seemed in common with them all was attacking the facts that it had orcs in it. So maybe in retrospect, they'd have steered clear from that. However, I think you can only say that in hindsight. So they should just go with it now. But it is very difficult to try and do a story on something that involved in like a film. Like, I mean, that's why they could never do it for Lord of the Rings. They could never make an actual film of Lord of the Rings. You know, the effort that Peter Jackson came up was probably as good as you can expect. Mount Hyjal. That would be a very confusing story, the Battle for Mount Hyjal, without a lot of backstory there, wouldn't it? Because you've got lots of things in there. You've got the Legion. You'd have to explain the Legion and Titans. You'd have to explain the Horde and the Night Elves and the Alliance. There's so many things you'd have to explain. The Sundering. I think it would be a very difficult one to do in isolation. The only thing, yeah, I saw Gilnean, possibly. It'd be difficult to tell. The only thing you definitely didn't see were gnomes in it. Because, you know, Duncan Jones isn't an idiot. No, it didn't. Because no one even mentioned the game in these reviews I read, other than films about games never do well. That's the only thing. There was no comment about the quality of the game at all or anything like that. Or not that I saw anyway. Obviously, I didn't read every review that was written in North America. And of course, a film can get panned by critics and still have success in an area. So, you know, only so many people read reviews. The stigma around a game. I don't know though, because I would have thought the same stigma that went around fantasy games might also hang around fantasy films. You might be onto something. I mean, obviously Lord of the Rings itself got away with it, you could argue, because it was based on literature and highly regarded literature. Although you say highly regarded, I was actually talking to someone recently about this. Because, like, Lord of the Rings, obviously voted Book of the 20th Century. At least it was in Britain. Or fictional work of the 20th century. What I could never understand, though, there must have been quite a lot of... Even though it met critical acclaim, like, journalists loved it. All the reviews about Lord of the Rings from, like, when they were first published were rave reviews. And became hugely popular. But what I could never understand is why, when there were a good 15-ish years between them all being published and Tolkien dying, why in all that time he never won the Nobel Prize for Literature. So I think there must have been a certain opposition to it from, you know, the elites of the literature world. But obviously I don't think that was a popular stigma. So people you know who don't know anything about the game, but they've heard of WoW, and their only thought is, isn't that the game nerds play? Well, people think about all sorts of things. People can think that about Lord of the Rings, though, can't they? They can think to themselves, Lord of the Rings, isn't that book that people who can read? People just think the same nerdy about reading books. Most people wouldn't get through Lord of the Rings unless they were actually readers. Someone make a movie about the Elder Scrolls series. I think as time goes on, there will be less of a problem. Like, you just need a few films, and I think Warcraft has done it in most of the world. You just need a few films of games to be good, to actually do a good job, and you'll sort of get there. And also, as more people grow up with, because there is still an influential generation, which is above my generation, which still regards video games as being for children. And I think the reason for that is because when video games came out, which is round about the same time that I came out, that was born, obviously that generation were my parents, and of course for kids, because it was the new technology at that time. So as another generation comes up, we'll have a situation where people just view it as a recreation, and as if esports like become more popular as well, as inevitably they will, it will become more the norm, and they'll get to a point where people won't even question a film being made based on a computer game. In the same way that no one questions people, no one talks about, oh, films based on books aren't usually very good, are they? People have long ago stopped saying that, if they ever did. So it's just another art form that some people will just get used to. I'm not sure too many people would have bought the game after watching the film. Most aren't that good, no, because I think it's because of that. Most do not make a serious attempt at it. Oh, the books, you mean? Well, that's because they can't. You cannot make a film. If you've got a book that's a good book, you cannot make a film of it. Because there's things you can do in a book that you cannot do in a film. Like, you can spend an entire chapter, like Tolkien does all the time, describing an area and talking about the thoughts and feelings of a character. You can't do that in a film. You have to portray it in a few seconds, and then you need action. So inevitably, if you've read a book and enjoyed a book and then watch a film of it, you will inevitably think it falls short. Sometimes it's probably better to watch the film first, then read the book. The WoW movie's biggest challenge to overcome was to change the perception people have about the WoW name. I don't know. Because there was such a different attitude in Europe and America that I'm not sure what that is. I don't understand what the cultural difference is. Obviously there is a cultural difference, but I don't understand what the cultural difference is that meant that it didn't do well in North America and did in Europe. It did okay. Well, it didn't, it did okay in Europe. It did well. Obviously not compared to how it did in Asia. Yeah, well, Game of Thrones, I haven't watched the series or read the books, so I'm not sure about that. Sometimes they do a pretty good job. I remember there was a television adaptation of Gormenghast a long time ago. That was actually quite good, and I'd read the books of that. And obviously it's not exactly the same, but it was a pretty good one. Well, there's also other things about books, like Peter Jackson noted, and he's quite right about this one. Let's say you compare it to Lord of the Rings. You cannot do a film of Lord of the Rings, and it doesn't matter how long you give yourself. If you filmed every scene of Lord of the Rings as the book is, it doesn't work. You can't do it. So because you need that action in there. Even if you're going to have it as largely an intellectual film, you need some action. You need people to move around now and then. Like in the film with Lord of the Rings, you go from Bilbo having his birthday party to Gandalf running off to Minas Tirith and back again. And even then you can imagine, well, maybe that takes a few months, maybe. And then he comes back, and then the following day Frodo's gone, leaving the Shire. Whereas in the book, all that takes 17 years. You can't do that in a film. Can you imagine that in the film where Gandalf says, look, this is the One Ring crafted by Sauron. We're going to have some people come in here to try and nick it. Frodo says, oh, we can't leave it in the Shire, can we? Gandalf, no, we can't. You're going to have to leave with it. Right, okay. Should I go now? No. Wait a few years. We're okay. We're fine. So yeah, I mean, they're just different art forms. They're not really compatible as such. But you can still make good films of books. They just won't ever be the same story. And you have to prepare yourself for that. I think there was a good example given about Judge Dredd. Not the last version of Judge Dredd were actually pretty good, I thought. But I'm not someone who ever read the comics. But I went to university with someone who was. And this was, when I was at university, is when the Sylvester Stallone one came out. And I watched it. And it was just a typical action thing. But I knew nothing about Judge Dredd. This friend of mine who did, he said, and I think this is the attitude you need to have when you're watching these things, he said, it was a very good film, but it wasn't Judge Dredd. Especially weird when time zones are a bit wonky and you have to find a way to visualise it properly. Maybe, yeah. Well, we can compare. Well, you sort of can in a bit, because the storyline of World of Warcraft, like the storyline that we know about, is not from the game. Warcraft, like the events, obviously the film diverged quite a lot, but nonetheless, the events in the film were based on Warcraft 1. But there was no storyline in Warcraft 1. All of that story that we think was from it was actually from the novels that were written. So all of our storylines from World of Warcraft and Warcraft have basically come from the novels that were written, especially the very early days. So they are really based on novels. So, you know, really it's not even true to say that the Warcraft film was based on a game, because it wasn't. It was based on a novel. I don't even remember hearing an orc say Darbu or Stop Poking Me, which is the only thing that was actually in the game that they didn't have. For example, in Warcraft 1, Medivh is in it and you are sent to kill him, but he's not described as a sorcerer gone bad. He's described specifically as a warlock. He's not a warlock in the official lore now. So once they got writers to write books about it and make it all make sense, he wasn't. So yeah, the early story of Warcraft is very much written in a book. I mean, Warcraft 3, I think, is the first time where they properly did stories. It was a bit better in Warcraft 2. But Warcraft 3, at that point, then they did start, I think, you could cobble together a coherent story from the single-player version of Warcraft 3 and the expansions of that. Yes, it has, because they keep retconning things. Some of the times I don't think they even need to. I don't know what they're playing at. Like with Illidan, I don't think they needed to retcon anything about Illidan. Really. I don't think they had to change anything, but they did anyway for the hell of it. I mean, some of it they even put in it was inexplicable. Like, when he talks in the Tomb of Sargeras, when you go down to Harjatan, or when you're in that general area, and he talks about, oh, when I used the Eye of Sargeras, people misunderstood me, but I did it for the good of Azeroth. It's like, no, you didn't. You were damaging Azeroth by using it. There was no good coming to Azeroth as a result of using it. He used it because Kil'jaeden told him to, and he was scared stupid of Kil'jaeden. But anyway, maybe it wasn't really retconned. Maybe the apparent retcon is just Illidan pretending that he was a good guy all along. Which actually, to be fair, the irony is he actually was, I think, a good guy to begin with, who was much maligned by his own people, including his own brother, and probably wouldn't have done half the things he did if he was shown a little bit more respect. It was a bit of a Billy the Kid character, really, wasn't he? Oops, what's that? Do I think Blizzard knows when they're going to stop with WoW games? No, I don't. Because there's a difference between, as well, when they'll stop when it's not profitable to keep going. And that will be a long time coming. Because, as I say, you've got MMOs at the moment that don't have anywhere near as many people playing them, that can still produce expansions and keep going. It doesn't cost very much in the grand scheme of things to keep a MMO going. And the actual, if reports are to be believed, cost of continually developing World of Warcraft is a tiny fraction of the money it actually makes. It's like a few percent, if that. So they can afford to keep going for a long time. Even if they bring out another Warcraft game that is intended to replace it, hope they never go free to play. It's always a bit difficult to judge something like that. It all depends if, when eventually it does decline, at some point it's got to. At some point the age will just start to tell. And it all depends at that point, will they decide it's better to just let it go gracefully, or will they attempt to milk it at the end for everything it's worth, like EA would if they had it. And if it's the latter, then they will make it go free to play, and if it's the former, they may or may not. It's always a bit of a misnomer anyway, free to play. There's almost no such thing. As indeed there can't be, because people can't make games for free. There's no government giving them money like a charity, or make this video game for these people. But I certainly think it is a long time off yet. What I don't know, my greatest thing is there's gonna, I don't know whether there's gonna come a point where they try and push it beyond what the game is now. Like what we'll be saying of the game in like 5 years' time, for example, 6 years' time, maybe even another 10 years' time. Because I remember when it got to the 10th anniversary, and and I sort of said, okay, well let's look towards the next 10 years now. And people are going, how it never lasts another 10 years? What's going on? Whereas we're already now a couple of years those in. Blizzard have made it quite clear there's several more expansions to come. If each expansion lasts about 2 years, then it surely is going to get up towards 20 years old at some point. There'd have to be a massive drop-off in what it's making. And if they did want to replace it with something, they'd have to develop another game to replace it with. That takes several years. And a lot of money. That's why I was saying the other day, I don't think it's in their mind to do a World of Warcraft 2. Even though it would be quite nice. Because you can imagine it from a business pitch point of view. It's like, we want to make a brand new MMO that's much more up to date, much better systems. It'll be loads better. World of Warcraft 2. And they can even argue there's been successful relaunches of MMOs of other franchises like Star Wars. And they can, but the question would ultimately be put to them. This thing would probably cost $200 and several years development. And it would have to be asked at that, is this thing going to make more money than World of Warcraft makes now? No. Because how can it? It would probably be less, because World of Warcraft is, you know, is the high point of an MMO. No other MMO, even a modern one, even the very successful ones, do as well. So the best they can hope for is that it matches it, which it probably won't even do that. So then it's like saying, well, Project Titan failed though, didn't it? And we still don't know all the details of it. Join a bit late now, not to worry. Well, I say not to worry, we are obviously quite close to the end now, but that's unfortunate, but never mind. I'm still not entirely sure about the details of Project Titan. They obviously reused some of it, rehashed some of it. But I would still like to know what their original vision for it was. I don't know how much they've actually... I know Chris Metzen had that interview, didn't he, when he retired? But I'm still not convinced they said as much about it as I would like. But then again, none of my business. But, I mean, Project Titan, surely, if anything, just makes them more risk-averse in terms of doing another one like that. Because why would you make another MMO and spend all that money and time if it's not actually going to beat your current product, which only requires the development of expansions as opposed to a brand new game with a brand new engine and brand new everything? Plus you'd need a brand new development team, because you can't... I suppose if World of Warcraft was dying out, you could take some people off that, reduce it down a bit, put it on a more of a... not a skeleton crew as such, but, you know, reduce it down a bit and get the other guys working on the new one to replace it. You'd probably want to keep it secret for as long as possible, because I think one of the big draws, or not draws, one of the things that keeps people playing World of Warcraft is there's a lot of long-term players that have got so much invested in the game. They don't really want to start again on another game, even though there might be other games that they would prefer, in theory. As soon as you say that there's another game coming to replace it, even though WoW would still continue after it, because as long as it's profitable, the servers will keep going, and they'll still presumably keep pulling expansions out, people might just think, well, what's the point, because our characters are going to be gone when it happens. So they'd have to play it very carefully. Oh, I think they would anyway. Raided with someone who did a 7-minute break instead of the usual 5, because that's how long it took him to say goodnight to his wife and then get his snacks ready. Now that's appalling. Right, those are two predictable events. Why didn't he get his snacks ready in advance? Although, I will be honest, I will be fair, 5 minutes is not really a break. You know, you should have more than that. You should have at least 10. Because people should use the break. Because, the thing is, like raid, especially when you need concentration, you should give people enough time to stand up and walk around and stuff like that as well. Because it refreshes you. When you're sat down, your body's not used to you sitting down except when it's time to rest. And when it's time to rest, it's time to turn your brain off. So sitting down is not a good position for when you need to concentrate. So, yeah, it should be big enough for you to actually stand up and walk around and what have you. But, yeah, in that particular case, given that he's forced into a 5-minute break, then, you know, I'm sure the snacks could have been arranged in advance. It was only 7 minutes. I don't think it's what you're thinking, Shadowfiend. Wives are indeed not predictable now. But snacks are. If it was just that first thing, I can understand it. Do I think Mythic will be expanded to 25 players when they introduce a new class? I don't think there's any guarantee they will introduce a new class. If they do, if they were going to do it because there's already too many classes for 20 man, they'd have already done it. I don't like to say no because I would like them to do that. Because the irony is, see, people think to themselves, like at the moment, it's really hard to recruit. And they're thinking, you know, and you think to yourself, if it's really hard to recruit 20 people, it'll be far worse to recruit 25. We won't be able to keep going. But ironically, if you have more people that you need for your roster, the easier it is to recruit because you can afford to have lower skilled players and still compete at the same level. Because one person's mistake, like one person in 20, let's say they just die, the ultimate mistake, then that's 4% of your raid gone. Obviously you can res them, but then, you know, but that's 4% of the effectiveness of your raid gone. Someone does it with 5%. What am I on about? I was doing it the other way around. Sorry. 20 man, first of all, that's 5% gone. 25 man, that's just 4% gone. So it's a bit less. So you can afford a little bit more slack. So when 25 man raiding was a thing, you could afford a little bit more slack. You could afford players to be not so good, and other players could compensate for them. Which means some of these players that I look at and I think to themselves, they can't deal with those mechanics. We can't take them. If it was 25 man, I might think to myself, those players can't deal with mechanics. But as long as we have enough that can, then we'll be all right. It's like vanilla. That was 40 man raiding. In reality, you only needed 20 who could do the stuff. The other 20, stand in that corner and press that button. If I say you've got the bomb, move to that other position. And that's it. You could deal with that. So you could have loads of people die on 40 man. And you'd still be fine. But as the raid size has got smaller and smaller, it's been tuned ever tighter. Now, in theory, of course, they could raise it to 25 and maintain a tight grip on the level of tuning. But that would be unnatural. That wouldn't naturally come. They'd have to deliberately do that. I don't think they would. So, yeah, yeah. But the problem is that for whatever reason that they're still not doing 25 man raiding, and I suspect I know what the reason is. I don't think that reason is going to go away anytime soon. So, but anyway, sort of come to the end of this one. Obviously, as usual, I don't just suddenly shut it off if I can help it. So I'll give it another few minutes if people want to ask or throw some comments in about whatever before I actually close it off, and then try and bag this up while I work on, as I say, another quick video, or just another silly video I want to do actually for tonight, if I can. Otherwise, it'll be tomorrow, I suppose. Or even at the weekend. I'm back at work now. Hard to know what my video making schedule is now. Trying to get as much done at the weekend as I can, I suppose. Oh, okay. Oh, thanks very much for coming on. I will finish this one off there, and tomorrow I'll be back raiding, trying to farm. What are we going to try and do? We're going to try and do 7 mythic bosses tomorrow. Try and get all 7 of our supposedly farm bosses done. We will see if that is feasible, and then back onto avatar progress. I might actually. What percent you expect your DPS numbers to turn with changes? Well, according to Sims, obviously the Sims, you know, if you do it for a different fight length, you get slightly different numbers. The different fights will give you naturally different numbers anyway. But for me, in terms of a single target like movement fight, it was working out at about 3.3%. But who knows? I might get a really stunning item from my weekly cache tomorrow, and it might go up a bit more. Or I might get another Chaos Crystal. We shall see. But yeah, a few percent I think is reasonable to expect. What I don't know is how much other people's will go up. But you can't really help that one. But anyway, yeah, so, but yeah, I might actually be on the rogue tomorrow, because I think one plan, we haven't definitely decided, would be for me to go, because I don't need anything on those bosses for definite on my paladin, other than to spend coins on them. And it might be possible, especially with coins, to sneak my rogue up to a position where the item level might be acceptable for doing, I strongly suspect not, but we'll see, for doing avatar, at least for soaking stuff. But so yeah, don't be surprised if I'm on my rogue playing very badly. Well, actually, which reminds me, I might have to spend tonight, instead of doing that video, I'm not class swapping. I really don't think it's a goer. It's just a suggestion, so I'm trying it out. There's no way I'm class swapping. If I was class swapping, I would be learning to play subtlety. But I'm not. It'll be assassination. And I'll just have to do the best I can with that. But, yeah, so, yeah, that will be tomorrow. Then Thursday will be our actual progress. Assuming we get all those farm bosses cleared. And then Friday, I'll just do some general gameplay on something or other. We'll decide. And then I'm going to sleep all the weekend. No, I'm not really, but I'd like to, because I'll have had my first week back at work and I'll be knackered. So I shall definitely need to get something to perk me up. But thanks for coming on. I'll see you later.